Joe Tony, as Minister of National Security, was on his feet when the Muslimin entered the chamber and they were shooting in the air. And of course, you know, everyone was startled, you know. I remember Jennifer Johnson standing up rather than hitting the floor. I had to grab her and pull her down, you know. And they ran in and they were, you know, shouting, get down, get down. Robinson and Richardson, they were anxious to get the Prime Minister and Selwyn Richardson. And they fired some shots. People may recall that Devines, who was on the side opposite, because remember it was 33-3, so NER members were even on what would normally be the opposition benches. And he got shot on the ankle. Trevor Sudama got a little nick on his ankle as well. But nobody else was shot at that point in time. They were more shooting in the air. I myself, it was myself and who was next to me? I think it was Dukaran. Then you had Tony Smart and Richardson and Robinson, and Joe Tony was at the as leader of government business was at the extreme end. And of course, Tony Smart ran out quickly. I think he was the one person who sought to even get away quickly, you know. And they came and they grabbed Robinson and Richardson and told us all to get on the ground. Well, we all got on the ground and they tied up everybody. They roughed up Richardson and Robinson, dragged them out into the area between the, you know, the open floor between the two benches. You know, tables were sent flying, etc. And that was the start of 5 days of, you know, capture inside of there with guns pointed at us and, you know, people in the public gallery were allowed to go out. And when I looked at the person who was obviously in charge of the Muslimin, you know, I said, he looks familiar. Was an old schoolmate of mine from St. Mary's. I think we know him as Bilal Abdullah. I knew him as Bradshaw, you know. And having played a bit of slap hand, you know, in school, you know, I said, what the hell, you know. We were all on the ground. Of course, the security forces outside, remember police headquarters was just across the road. Police officers were shooting widely into the Parliament building and that kind of thing. So you had to keep your head down. They tied up Richardson and Robinson in the open floor, and everybody else was basically in where they would have sat, but on the ground this time, you see, with the chairs, you know, between the chair and the back, and made everybody remain silent. And it was clear that on a number of occasions, the security forces were firing randomly through the windows, you know, and I think I was probably more scared of being killed by a stray bullet than anything else. I remember Bilal, of course, when it would appear that the security forces were about to attack because there was shooting going on and it looked like there was an attack imminent, of course, came to Robinson and put the walkie-talkie close to him and said to him, the security forces are attacking. Tell them to call off the attack or I will shoot the ministers one by one and throw them over the balcony. Then he put the walkie-talkie close to Robinson, who was lying on his stomach next to Selwyn Richardson, and they were hands tied behind their backs, their feet together. So the two of them were like this, on the ground facing downwards, and Bilal comes, goes down on his haunches, he has a pistol in one hand, and he puts the walkie-talkie next to Robinson and says, now tell me what you are going to say. Now, by this time, I was on the ground lying next to them, well, not next to, their feet here, and my feet are to their feet. And my head is this way, and their head is that way, and he comes this way, and he does that, and Robinson, of course, says the famous words with a lot of vehemence, you know. He says, they're torturing us, attack with full force. And Bilal says, oh, so you have no regard for the life of your ministers. And he goes, bam, bam, 2 shots quickly into the legs of Robinson and Richardson. The fella passed with a rag or something, and he shoved it in Robinson's mouth and started to put a bandana around his mouth. And he started to gag. So I shouted out, no, no, you'll kill him, don't do that, don't do that. And he was sort of startled, and he looked at me, and he just took it off, you know. And then Robinson was able to breathe all right, and so. I then turned around because Dukaran was still behind the chair, the tables on the ground. And I rolled over and turned to him and says, Winston, man getting shoot here, say you're going to negotiate. And of course, he was, you know, he was still shaking a little bit, you know. And I shouted at him again. I said, come on, Winston, say you're going to negotiate. And he raised his hand and said, let's talk, let's talk. And that's how the talking started. You know, I think first with John Humphrey and Joe Tony and so. And it wasn't until some time later that, you know, things settled down and what have you. But all of that was, I think, the greatest moment of anxiety and historical significance. And then when it got to a certain point, of course, John Humphrey's famous words were, I think we should get this in writing. To which everybody in the parliament let out a groan, including some of the Muslimin, because we'd been there like about 2 days by the time they got to the point where they agreed on a few things, you see. And then is when Selwyn Richardson came into it. By this time, he was not tied up anymore and what have you, and a number of things that happened since then, you know. And then they had to draft what became the amnesty document. And amnesty was basically, you know, we give up and, you know, we go free. And certain things would be done about the government and what have you. And we signed off on it. All the ministers signed. They asked me to sign here close here. Everybody agreed to sign here, right? You sign, you know. Of course, the Privy Council eventually ruled it really invalid because it was done under duress. But, you know, that's a long story. It's been 30 years since then, eh? And funnily enough, I always get mixed up with the chronology of events, you know. But the important events are sort of printed on my mind, you know. Of course, that incident, of course, was the most important one. It's interesting, when I got an opportunity, I looked at him and I said, Bradshaw, you know, I had my hand still in the tie at the time. I said, Bradshaw, right. And I called the name of our mutual friend of ours in St. Mary's, you see. And I said, you know, yes, you know, he got married in Cayman. And he said, yes, I was invited to the wedding, but I couldn't go. So that was the first sign of recognition, because by then he'd gone bald, you know, his head was bald, you know. But I picked up on him, you know, who it was. But that was helpful. And, you know, there were instances where, you know, I remember myself, Joe Tony, Selby Wilson, another Muslimin guy, and Bilal there, and all of us were ex-St. Mary's boys, you know, which was interesting because, you know, that particular Muslimin, he and I were on the ground together, and he started asking me, remember the days in St. Mary's? And, you know, we were talking about our days in St. Mary's, you know. So it was an interesting variation on hostage syndrome. You know, the hostages and the captors were known to each other. Bilal obviously had a little faith in me when he asked me to attend to the Veens, and then eventually Robinson, and then the other Muslimin and so. One fella had, young fella, tall, dark fella, shot through the foot, you see. So I told the Muslimin guys, listen guys, everybody you need attention, form a line. By this time I'm walking about the place, you know. And when his turn came and I looked at the wound, I looked at him and I said, idiot, you shoot yourself in the foot now. And he said, yes, doc, You know what I mean? It was funny. I mean, these were little boys. You know what I mean? His reaction to what was shooting himself in the foot, which of course is a stupid thing that even trained soldiers do sometimes. You know, you're holding the gun and you get excited and you pull the trigger. You know, so I recognized immediately from the nature of the wound that he shot himself in the foot. You know, but it was his reaction, this childish reaction. You know, a lot of talking was going on. John Humphrey had pulled the phone from the library next to the Parliament chamber and brought it into the chamber. So this is how Bilal was talking to Joe Theodore and to Abu Bakr in TTT and what have you, you know. And I'm hearing Bilal, I'm next to Bilal, literally, and I'm hearing Abu Bakr shouting and screaming over the phone, you know, and Bilal is saying, Imam, relax, take it easy, we're under control here, take it easy, all right, you know what I mean? Bilal had to be calming him down. He was clearly, I think he was very excited and panicking, and you could hear him. The phone is rattling with sound, you know. I couldn't hear exactly what was being said, but, you know, I'm hearing Bilal, I'm next to Bilal, you know, as he's talking and saying, okay, Imam, calm down, it's all right, you know, take it easy and that kind of thing. You know, so I don't know what was going on at TTT, of course, but I know he was very, very hyper, put it that way. There was a lot of negotiation going on, eh? The interesting part to me was not so much just the negotiation, but the phone would ring, you see. Pick up the phone, yes. This is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Could we speak to the Prime Minister, please? You see? And somebody would say, hey, Robbie, the phone for you, you know. And by this time, Robinson was in a different spot sitting. And one of the Muslims had to put Robinson on his back and, you know, carry him to the phone. You know, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation rang. You know, one of the local journalists, female journalists, also, you know, called. And, you know, Robinson would talk to them, you know. By that time, it was clear that while there were a few senior Muslims there, most of them were a lot of little boys who ended up, you know, you'd call them and say, hey, you come here, you know. And they say, yes, Minister, what can I do for you? You know. It was an interesting dynamic, you know. Lots of jokes were being made in the public at large. Believe me, it wasn't like that at all. It didn't end up like that. As I say, it was a very interesting dynamic.